Brid Smith, the Deputy, to move.
Yes.
Move. Deputy Smith.
Yeah, I just give a bit of an explanation on this because I had another motion that was ruled out of order, and ruled out of order on the basis that it would incur a cost to the state. And indeed it would incur a cost to the state, but I want to argue that unless we go down the route of creating equality here, we may incur a further and larger cost to the state, because I believe this is legislatively challengeable. So let me explain. The situation in 2012 in this House, a measure was brought in under the then current Minister for Social Protection, Joan Burton, which gave recognition to what they called homemakers, usually women but could be men, who sometimes leave their or who do leave their job in the course of their lives, and when their contributory pension is being calculated, the years over which it has been calculated is from when they started work to when they finished work. But there's a chunk in the middle where they didn't work because they were making a home, having children and or rearing them and all that jazz. And that chunk would be taken into account when the average over all of the years of your working life was calculated, which brought their contributory pension rate right down. So in 2012, Joan Burton brought in a measure that would discard the homemaker years for homemakers post 1994. So if you left your job and made a home in the years after 1994, when you come to retire, the average over your working life would disregard those homemaker years. Now, here's where it's important, because we have a group of women. I know other deputies are going to speak to this, but I think probably deputies all over the country may be familiar with this. There are a group of mainly women, there might be an odd man in there, but mainly women who worked in the 60s, early 70s, and generally speaking, in those days, a lot of workers started work quite young, at the age 14, 15, 16, didn't go on to do their leaving cert, etc. Then got married, maybe about the ages of 19, 20, and spent about 10, 15, 20 years making the home and rearing their kids. And then later on went back to work. In the case of some women I'm dealing with, they went back to work as late as 1983, 84, 85, and worked right up until last year and this year. Then they retire, apply for their old age pension, only to find that although for the last 33 years they have consistently paid a full contributory rate towards their pension, the calculation was brought right back to the late 60s, early 70s, averaged out over all those years, and it dragged the rate that they achieved down. So in the case of two women, I'll just say their names again, Lillian and Jean, instead of an expectation of getting €230 a week, the top contributory rate of pension, they now, who have, and they've only retired in the last year, are receiving €209 a week, which is a considerable amount of money over the course of a year, indeed a considerable more amount of money over the course of the hopefully many happy and healthy years that they will continue to live. So there's a clear discrimination taking place against homemakers who made their home in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, 80s, as against those who made their home post-1994, who won't have retired yet anyway. So I assume that when the Department of Social Protection wanted to bring in this measure to eliminate discrimination against women because they got pregnant and reared children, they looked at when will this impact on us? When will we have to start taking this into account? And clearly 1994 was chosen for a reason, because sometime around then you're looking at the many years before any of those homemakers will be in a position to retire. However, we're now coming across a tranche of homemakers who are retiring, who have worked for the last 30+ years and paid good money into the system, and are being penalised because in 1969 or 1970, when they got married and they left their job for the next 10-15 years, all of that is being dragged back to average out their contributions, and therefore their contributions are being dragged down. Now, I know if this was to be passed, if that had been allowed, if that that amendment had been allowed and was passed, it would indeed incur a cost to the state, but a justifiable cost to the state, because here is a clear act of discrimination against a certain section of society, and I would argue it's an ageist discrimination. And I think we could probably prove that legislatively. Now, I just want to make this point. I've been listening over the years to various organisations like Social Justice Ireland and the National Women's Council, etc., arguing for an equality-proofed budget, which I think would be a great idea if you had equality-proofed budgets. But here we have a budget and a bill for the Department of Social Protection, and we have an opportunity to equality-proof it. But unfortunately, there are many other inequalities created in the Department of Social Protection, and glaringly the one that jumps out at you is the inequality and the discrimination against young people who are on job seekers allowance. If you're 20, you get one payment, €100. If you're 25 or 26, you get a bit more, and if you're older again, you'll get more. So there's an ageist discrimination for those job seekers on different levels, and now here's another ageist discrimination for those who are coming to retire in this current period, and it will continue. There'll be another 10 years of this homemakers, maybe 15 years before the homemakers will catch up with the post-1994 situation. So it's quite a serious breach of equality legislation, and I think we'd be able to prove it so on whether we have to go to Europe or go to the courts with it, or indeed to the pensions ombudsman. But this is not going to stay where it's at. So this is why I have asked in this other motion number 50, what is it? Where is it gone again?
27.
Yeah, 27, sorry. No, number 7, sorry, amendment number 7, that after 3 months of the passing of the bill, that the Minister would lay before the Dáil a complete report on the homemaker scheme, the contributions over the years that have been disregarded, and the purposes of determining the yearly average of claimants who raised families in that period. And I can well understand both the anger, the disappointment, and really the feeling of abandonment by this state of those women who have just turned 65, 66 and find themselves at a huge disadvantage, having worked really hard and consistently for the previous 30, 35 years, and before that having worked really hard and consistently rearing their children, and before that having gone out to work early as young women. And as I say, there's probably the odd man in there as well. But by and large, this is a discrimination against women on ageist grounds and possibly on gender grounds as well. So I think really we need that report. We need to look at it carefully. In the meantime, because the original motion was ruled out of order, we'll do what we have to do in terms of going to the pensions ombudsman, building a campaign and getting advice on this, but it's a serious breach in the social welfare legislation.